When Squid Game launched on Netflix in September 2021, it took the world by storm, topping charts within days. But while it seemed like an overnight success, the true story behind Squid Game reveals a much longer, much harder journey, one filled with rejection, willpower, and a deep understanding of human nature. In this video, we'll break down the long and difficult path in getting Squid Game published and explain how it almost never was. The long road to greenlight. Director Hwang Dong-hyuk first came up with the idea for Squid Game way back in 2008. At the time, he had just recently debuted in the Korean film industry, hanging out in comic book stores and soaking up graphic novels for fun. Inspired by the vivid storytelling he found there, he started to imagine a story that could feel like a comic book, but hit the viewers with the emotional power of a feature film. Within a year, he completed the first script for what he originally envisioned as a movie, the project we now know as Squid Game. However, the world just wasn't ready, and he had a lot on his plate. The concept, a brutal survival competition rooted in children's games, felt too bizarre, too violent, and also way too risky for the entertainment industry of that era. Investment was nearly impossible to secure after recent market crashes. Casting major actors proved difficult, and after a whole year of struggling, Hwang had no choice but to shelve the project. Over the next decade, he focused on other work. His films Silenced in 2011, Miss Granny in 2014, and The Fortress in 2017 established him as a respected director in South Korea, paving the way for future projects to get off the ground much easier. Yet the story of Squid Game never truly left him over those years, and during all this, the world around him began to change. Global audiences became much more open to darker, complex narratives, as opposed to the typical action-focused Hollywood flicks. Stories once considered too violent or too strange found homes on new platforms that demanded bold content. Finally, Netflix entered the picture. With its global reach and willingness to take risks on Korean content in the 2010s, Netflix offered Hwang the creative freedom he needed. No strict limits, no demands to water down his vision. For the first time, Squid Game had a real chance to come alive. But that was just the start of a very long road, creating a cultural bridge. From the beginning, Hwang aimed to create a series that was deeply Korean, but also instantly understandable to audiences everywhere. He believed that the most specific cultural elements often carried the most universal emotions. In Squid Game, the creepy children's games, red light, green light, tug of war, marbles, and the final Squid Game itself, were rooted in Korean culture, but their simplicity made them accessible worldwide, without complex rules needing to be explained like other projects. By choosing games that everyone could understand within a few seconds, Hwang allowed audiences to focus on the emotional journeys of the characters playing them rather than the games themselves. Instead of following a lone genius solving puzzles, like many generic survival stories, Squid Game followed a huge cast of ordinary, struggling people, losers in society's eyes, who survived only by leaning on each other for support. Visually, Squid Game set itself apart through its colorful yet unsettling world. Art director Chae Kyung-sun and Hwang worked together to design massive, vibrant sets that played with the contrast between childlike innocence and deadly stakes. From pastel-colored staircases to candy-hued playgrounds, the bright visuals created a dissonance that made every death even more jarring, especially as the blood started to paint things red. The games themselves were purpose-built to look inviting and even nostalgic, but lurking beneath every friendly surface was the constant threat of death and violence. This carefully engineered contrast between beauty and horror gave Squid Game a visual uniqueness that was instantly recognizable and unsettling. At its heart, Squid Game was never just about survival games. It was a dark commentary on our modern capitalist society. Hwang wanted to depict the brutal competition that defines adult life, where the stakes are survival itself, and the forces at play seem both arbitrary and merciless at the same time. Participants in the game represent those crushed by debt, societal failure, and a desperate hope for escape. Their willingness to risk everything for a slim chance at freedom mirrored real-world obsessions with cryptocurrency, stock markets, real estate booms, Ponzi schemes, and the elusive dream of sudden fortune. The message was clear, but never overly preachy. Instead, it unfolded through character choices, desperate alliances, betrayals, and heartbreaking losses. The pain behind the process. Making Squid Game was far from easy. Hwang described the process as a full 100% stress experience. Each night before filming, he would stay up revising scenes, obsessively trying to find ways to make each moment more powerful and believable. The gamble was enormous. He knew the story could easily be dismissed as too strange or too grim. It could have been either a groundbreaking masterpiece or an unwatchable oddity. There was no middle ground. The toll on his health, both mental and physical, was real. Hwang later revealed that during the production, he lost 8 or 9 teeth from sheer stress. Every scene, every choice weighed heavily on him. Even the choice of children's games was deliberate. Hwang selected each one not only for its familiarity, but for the emotional journey it would trigger. Red light, green light, used as the opening game, was chosen for its simplicity and immediate impact, turning a harmless playground activity into a massacre, intended to give us a jolt as the reality of the game sinks in. The Squid Game itself, used for the final round, was chosen for its symbolic weight. The shapes drawn on the ground formed an arena, a battlefield where survival demanded not only physical strength, but emotional surrender. The irony of ending a life or death competition with a game meant for children was intentional, deepening the themes of lost innocence and societal decay as we grow older. One of the greatest challenges Huang faced was walking the fine line between fantasy and realism. The concept itself, adults playing children's games to the death, was inherently fantastical. Yet for the story to resonate emotionally, it had to feel real. Balancing these two worlds demanded constant fine-tuning. The actors were placed into enormous practical sets rather than green screens, encouraging genuine performances. Every corner, every wall was crafted to stimulate real emotions, from the playgrounds to the dormitories where players slept. This careful balance grounded the crazy premise in authentic human feeling, making it really sell the show as not being too far out there. When Squid Game finally launched, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, it became the most watched show on Netflix in multiple countries, including the United States. The simplicity of the games, the universal desperation of the characters, and the extremely well-done storytelling combined into something viewers couldn't look away from. Social media exploded with memes, merchandise sales soared, and the haunting imagery of the giant doll from red light, green light became instantly iconic. For Huang, the roller coaster ride had begun, and years of struggle, self-doubt, and perseverance had paid off, though it came at a lot of personal cost. A mirror to society's games. Part of Squid Game's massive success came from its timing. Released during a global pandemic and a period of growing wealth inequality, the show tapped into a collective sense of disillusionment with the norms around us. Audiences everywhere recognized the brutal competition mirrored in their own lives. The endless rat race for financial stability, the widening gap between rich and poor, the feeling that systems meant to protect exploited. All of these realities were interlaced into the deadly games of the series. Huang himself noted that, tragically, the world had changed into a place where a story like Squid Game made more sense than it had when he first wrote it. In interviews following the show's success, he spoke openly about the double-edged nature of fame. On one hand, Squid Game had brought him the acknowledgement of a lifetime. On the other hand, it had set a bar so high that anything he created afterward would inevitably be compared to it and could fall short. He described the experience as both a blessing and a curse. The success was overwhelming, but it carried with it the weight of expectations and the fear of never replicating the same impact again. Despite the global sensation that Squid Game became, Huang revealed a surprising truth. Financially, he had not seen the kinds of profits many assumed. Netflix had paid him a basic upfront fee, as was standard at the time, but unlike traditional film releases, there was no cut of the series' massive earnings. It highlighted a growing concern among South Korean creators about fair compensation in the era of international streaming giants. The issue caused wider conversations about copyright law, creator rights, and how the industry needs to evolve to protect the people who bring global hits to life. Initially, Huang was reluctant to even consider a second season. The emotional and physical toll of creating the first had been insane, and the pressure of expectations was exhausting to even think about facing. However, two things changed his mind. First was the recognition that, despite the intense stress, he had not fully finished telling the story. Second was the practical reality, financial compensation. Having poured so much into the first season without a proportional return, a second season offered a chance to secure his future with better pay. Season 2 would bring new challenges, new players, and a deeper exploration of the world behind the games. And if you thought Season 1 was bleak, Season 2 came along to shock you out of the room. The darkest path lies ahead. 3 years after the first season aired, as work on the sequel began, Huang expressed an even greater sense of pessimism about the world. Wars, climate change, and political divisions. The global environment had deteriorated further. The new season of Squid Game would reflect this darker outlook, digging deeper into themes of tribalism, generational divides, and the dangerous urge to split the world into us versus them. This time, players would be forced not only to survive, but to choose clear sides, highlighting the corrosive effects of division and distrust. Season 2 would also expand on the story's background events. Viewers would learn more about the frontman, the masked leader of the games, and his conflicted past. The expansion of backstories was designed to add layers to the story's world without sacrificing its emotional urgency. The sets recreated a twisted version of playgrounds, childhood memories, and neighborhood alleyways from the 1970s and 1980s Korea. These carefully crafted environments stirred a sense of nostalgia in viewers, only to shatter it with scenes of betrayal and violence. It reminded audiences that the purity of childhood is fragile, and once lost, it cannot be reclaimed. Squid Game's impact goes far beyond entertainment. It redefined what Korean drama could achieve globally. It opened doors for other Korean creators, and it forced major players in the entertainment industry to deal with questions about fairness, labor rights, and creative ownership. And there's no doubt that Season 3 is once again going to provoke deep reflection for both business owners and ordinary viewers alike. So that's been the difficult origins behind Squid Game and how it was almost never made.